And hello, Savannah. Thank you for tuning into Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer. You're listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And on today's show, we have some really cool stuff prepared. On the show, we talk about anything and everything related to real estate investing for the small-scale investor, but also for anybody who's a homeowner or who is aspiring to be a homeowner or an investor or a landlord. So basically, we talk about real estate in general. And today's topic will be adverse possession, what it actually is. And I want to just give you a little bit of a background on that, what it is, a little bit the history, where the history and the laws came from, and how adverse possession rights are applied here in the United States. And before I get started, though, with the topic, I wanted to kind of just give you an outline of how my show is structured. Usually I talk a little bit of a dry topics usually, so I hope you don't fall asleep there on your Wednesday lunch hour. But what we do, we talk basically the real estate topics. We kind of intermix me talking with playing music as well from my favorite playlists. And also wanted to remind you that all my shows are recorded. So if you catch only part of it, or if you miss something, or you want to hear it again, you can always go to the WRUU.org website. And under archives, under Wednesday, you can see my face there, and you can basically re-listen to this show again. I also have a YouTube channel. It's very easy to find, Julia M. Spencer. Videos are free to watch, all for your information, so you can listen to the radio shows there. Also, I have an additional lots of other videos. I think I have close to 700 or 800 videos now, about 13,000 subscribers. Everybody, thank you. So, yeah, if you want to check that out, that's there for you as well. And I'm also a local real estate investor, so I have a lot of properties that I have here in this town and the city, as well as in other states and other areas. I'm also an Airbnb host, or vacation rental host, I guess you could say. And I do a lot of flipping, remodeling, and things like that. So I am really not just talking on the radio. I'm actually in the ditches doing what I preach. And before we get started, what about adverse possession rights? That's our topic for today. I'm going to play a little bit of music. So please don't go anywhere. Stay on. And I will be right back. And thank you for joining me here for Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer, where we talk about anything and everything related to real estate investing. And on today's show, we're talking about adverse possession rights. Before I get started, though, I wanted to let you know that the viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. And I am also not an attorney, so please do not accept what you hear on this show as legal advice, but basically just some information for you. So adverse possession rights, what are they? They're basically something, well, I guess you could say in the colloquially described sense, squatters' rights. That's basically the legal principle under which a person who does not have legal title to a piece of property, usually land, acquires legal ownership based on continuous possession of or occupation of the property without the permission of its legal owner. And if you are a subscriber to my YouTube channel, I actually made a video about this a little while ago, probably like 3 or 4 years ago, and it had the title of Statute of Limitations. So it kind of plays with adverse possession rights, the statute of limitations. So if you wanted to get a little bit of background on it and why I even came about researching this topic, go ahead and check that video out. But this particular research topic here today actually came about because I am currently in the process of acquiring a property in Atlanta, Georgia, and although the transfer of that property was not done through a foreclosure, it's basically just a sale from the owner to me, that my investors out in California, my graybeard investors, advised me to research adverse possession rights just to make sure that I kind of double check have all my ducks in a row and double check everything that I need to do, and to see if an occupation or possession of a property over an extended period of time will kind of solidify the fact that I've purchased this property from this original owner, because we're in the process of purchasing it, but we're not going to file the paperwork at the courthouse just yet. And that is because we don't want to change the mortgage. So if you basically change ownership of a property, but you don't change the financing, there's a little clause in most all mortgages that basically says if you're changing ownership, then you need to change financing. Otherwise, we can call on the loan, but we kind of want to keep the loan in place. So we're kind of working on this together. It's a little bit of a workaround, but adverse possession rights basically will solidify the fact that the property is mine because I've held it over a certain period of time, and I need to make some sort of statement or affidavit and file that, or at least have that in my possession, so that it is solidified that I had ownership and possession. So let's talk a little bit more about these adverse possession rights. No, I'm hitting you with a fire hose here. But in general, a property owner has the right to even actually recover the possession of their property from unauthorized possessors through legal actions such as ejectment. So that's basically eviction or ejectment, same thing. However, in the English common law tradition, courts have long ruled that when someone occupies a piece of property without permission, and the property's owner does not exercise their right to recover their property for a significant period of time, not only is the original owner prevented from exercising their right to exclude, but an entirely new title to the property springs up in the adverse possessor's rights, basically. So what does all of that mean? That basically just means if you walk around and you find a piece of property and you start moving in, and or even land, if you start building something on a piece of land that isn't yours, and you're there for many, many years, I guess, and the years depend on where you are in the United States. So basically, when you take possession and you start improving and doing stuff to the property, after a certain amount of time, that property is yours. Crazy, huh? So basically, it's taking land or real estate, improved real estate, by taking it. Basically, taking it and owning it also. So, in effect, the adverse possessor becomes the property's new owner. And over time, legislatures have created statutes of limitations. Here's where the statute of limitations plays into this. That specify the length of time that owners have to recover possession of the property from adverse possessors. In the United States, for example, these limits vary widely between individual states ranging from as low as 3 years to as long as 40 years. So a little bit later in the show, or in the last segment, actually, I'm going to tell you a little bit the details of how that works here in the state of Georgia. But I will also tell you where you can research this in the state where you live, in case you're listening to this show later on sometime on the YouTube channel, or if you're just more interested in the topic. And that's kind of what adverse possession is. So it's kind of interesting that actually exists. And where did I run into this before? Let me just think. So I was researching adverse possession rights actually because a lot of properties in a couple of years ago right here in Chatham County were on the auction block for unpaid taxes. And a lot of these properties were on no bids, basically. They were not bid on, and nobody wanted them. And they basically went back to the county's real estate log, I guess. And some of the properties, and one actually very close to one of my properties there on 37th Street, was being auctioned off over and over. And over, nobody would bid on it. And it's just been, taxes just being added, the price is getting higher and higher, the property's losing value more and more because it's not being maintained. And so basically, I was wanting to know, how do I get ownership of this property without having to pay this huge outstanding tax price? And I was researching a little bit about the adverse possession rights. Come to think of this particular example, though, I cannot apply adverse possession rights to a property that's owned by the government. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history and why that is. So let's talk about that now. We have a couple more minutes before the bottom of the hour, so I'm going to squeeze this in here a little bit. So let's talk about the history here. So in Roman law, laws allow someone to become an owner if the original owner did not appear after some time. And back in Roman law, it was 1 or 2 years, unless the good or the basic property was obtained by force or theft. And the Napoleonic Code adopted this, basically it's Roman law later, and was also later incorporated into the laws of France, Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg, Portugal, Spain, Netherlands, and Germany. So, but in those particular countries, you would basically have to hold the property for somewhere around 30 years. 30 years is basically the max, but a lesser amount too, where the property would then become yours after a certain legal process. So, but depending on the bona fide of the possessor and location who is involved. And bona fide basically just means good faith, whether the property changed hands willingly or if there was like a fight, basically. In human interactions, that's basically if it's a sincere intention to be fair, open, and honest, regardless of the outcome of the interaction, as opposed to mala fides and pretense, basically. I had to look that up. That's Latin. So here's your Latin lesson for the day here, dear Savannah listeners. So, and so that was a little bit of the history on that. And, and we're going to talk a little bit more about adverse possession rights here in just a moment. But basically, the elements of the adverse possession are different in every jurisdiction. A person claiming adverse possession is usually required to prove non-permissive use of the property that is actual, open and notorious, exclusive, adverse, and continuous for the statutory period. And we're going to talk about each one of those. So it's actual, open and notorious, exclusive, adverse, and continuous for the entire statutory period for that particular state. So let's talk about that here in a minute. But before we get to that, another little break song, a couple of announcements, and I'll be right back. So stay on. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for staying with me here with Real Estate Real Talk. We're talking about adverse possession rights here today, and we're not quite yet at the bottom of the hour, so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about history of adverse possession rights before we get there, and then we're going to talk about the USA and the requirements on what a party that seeks title by adverse possession has to do to prove the ownership, basically, and take possession of that property. But before we get to that, England and Wales, let's talk about that. I don't want to bore you with the history, but the statutes of limitations have actually been in place since 1623, when England instituted its first general statute limiting the right to recover possession of land. And important to note that is that at that time, there was, of course, lots of kings and queens that ruled the world. And at that time, however, those statutes were actually stating that no time should ever run against the king. So, nullum tempus occurrit regi. So, I'm not very good at Latin, so sorry about that. In the U.S., this actually was carried over to federal and state governments. Government land is immune from loss by adverse possession. So, land with registered title and some torrents title system is also immune. That's basically land registered and transfer system maintained by the state, such as Hawaii. So Hawaii has special rights where you can't claim adverse possession rights, and encourage you to basically research that a little bit more. But currently in England and Wales, there is a Land Registration Act of 2002, and in that it basically says that you can claim adverse possession if you are the possessor, basically, of the land or property 10 years plus 2 years. 2 years for notification, so that's a legal requirement and mostly applies to land. But since September of 2012, squatting in a residential building is a criminal offense, but this also does not prevent title being claimed by the adverse possession, even if the claimant is committing a criminal offense. So basically, in England and Wales, if you take possession of a residential building, that is a criminal offense, but you can still apply to get ownership of it. So go figure whether that makes sense to you or not, because it didn't to me. But that's how the laws are. That's how the laws read. And also, that kind of also shows that if you are getting into real estate investing and getting into this kind of topic, and you are researching properties and laws, you will also always want to learn how the laws work, how they're written, and try to work around, work and carve out a little niche for you that will work. And that applies not just for the laws in England and Wales, but also here in the United States. So after the break, because we're almost at the bottom of the hour, and by the way, you're listening to Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer right here on WRUU. We're going to talk a little bit about the U.S. and what the party that seeks title by adverse possession must do or must prove in order to have and gain ownership of the land or improved property. And before we get to that, I got a couple of announcements, so please stay on. Don't go anywhere.
Senior Citizens Incorporated is looking for volunteer Meals on Wheels drivers. A few hours each week will connect some of our area's most vulnerable residents with nutritious food and a regular knock on the door. For more information, contact Laura at 912-964-5411.
Where else do you find music and talk programs like the ones you hear on WRUU? The answer is nowhere. Nowhere on the radio dial and nowhere streaming will you find radio hosts bringing you such a variety of music and talk from or about Savannah. The radio dial, of course, is so mainstream and commercial. And streaming does offer great variety, but it's not local. WRUU brings you the voices, the creativity, and the diversity that you'll find only in Savannah. No one can do WRUU like us. This is a one-of-a-kind, independent radio station. To keep it going strong, we need your support right now. Thank you.
All of the in-person fundraising events we normally have throughout the year have been canceled because of the coronavirus. Supporting WRUU with your financial gift is very important to us. If you made a one-time contribution to WRUU last year, consider changing that to a monthly gift this year. Monthly gifts help you help WRUU. They help you by spreading out a large gift over a year's time. $10 a month is about 30 cents a day, but it adds up to $120 of support each year for your favorite radio station. Monthly gifts are automatically renewing, and you control when they start and stop. So there's no need to remember when your year of support is up. And we can count on that support every month to bring you great radio programming. We use the super easy PayPal website to make the transfer from your card to our account. And you might already have a PayPal account. If not, it's one of the most trusted online money transfer methods that you can use of all types of online shopping. So go ahead and become a monthly contributor now. Find the details at wruu.org. And thanks for supporting Savannah's best local talk radio as voted by readers in the most recent Connect Savannah poll. WRUU 107.5 FM.
And thank you, Savannah, for staying here with me with Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer. Appreciate your time here. On today's show, we're talking about adverse possession rights. And basically, in this segment, we're going to talk about what the party that seeks title by adverse possession may have to prove or may have to do in order to get property, basically, and or secure, basically, or solidify their ownership in this case. And the first thing that I want to mention that in the legal terms, in the legal sense, is that this party that seeks title by adverse possession is called the desacer, and that's an interesting term, actually. And to dispose the true owner of a property is really different in every state. There should be, though, 5 basic conditions that need to be met. The desacer must openly occupy the property exclusively, open and notorious, keep out others, use it as if it was their own, and some states even have additional requirements, such as hostility requirements, showing of good faith. That basically just means that claimants must demonstrate that they had a basis to believe that they owned the property. And 4 states require these additional requirements, and that actually includes Georgia. Georgia, Illinois, New York, and Wisconsin are the ones that require this showing of good faith clause and hostility requirement. And as of 2014, a dissessor or the person that seeks title by adverse possession in North Carolina and Georgia has to have that property for 16 to 20 years. In Tennessee and Florida, 5 to 7 years. And in Alabama, 8 to 10 years. And that also applies to South Carolina. So those are kind of like the timelines here. And I did actually make a video where I mentioned that the time frame was much shorter for Georgia. And I believe I mentioned 7 years. And that was also for adverse possession, but I think the video kind of focused a little bit more on somebody who actually acquired the property through a tax sale foreclosure, and I believe the time frame may be a little bit different then. Again, if you are a attorney and you know this information better, you can always send me a message. Please don't hesitate, because I always want to correct when I'm wrong with something. And again, this is an opinion. I'm not an attorney or a lawyer or anything, so this is just my own personal research for my own benefits here. So let's talk a little bit more about the requirements. Actual possession. So the dissessor must use land as the property owner would. That's what that means. So walking and hunting on land does not count, and the actions of the dissessor must change the land, such as clearing it, mowing it, or planting stuff on it or something, harvesting from it, livestock, holding livestock on it, or construction of buildings on it, basically improve the property and maintain it. Another requirement in the U.S. to claim adverse possession rights is hostile possession. So the dissessor must have entered and used the land without permission, so by the true owner. So basically, if you have a neighbor and they have a bunch of land and they let you use it and they know that you're using it and they let you put a building on it, that's not adverse possession, basically, because the true owner knows that you're there and you're supposed to be there because you have permission. So the dissessor must have entered the land without permission for this particular requirement to have been met. Also, you need to be, as the party that seeks title by adverse possession, you need to have an open and notorious view. That means the dissessor must possess the property in a manner that is capable of being seen. So actual knowledge of the original owner, such as basically fencing it or gating it, or you basically be very open about it. Another requirement is continuous use, which means the dissessor must hold that property continuously for the entire statute of limitation period and use it as a true owner would. So those are the requirements. There cannot be any gaps or in that continuous use. So what that basically means that if you want to claim adverse possession rights on a property that you are not the true owner of, you can't just go there occasionally and cut the grass and say, "Oh, it's mine, I cut the grass." That doesn't count. So if the true owner either verbally or through legal action ejects the dissessor, then the statute of limitations basically starts over. So there's a couple of very good requirements here. Another requirement for you to claim adverse possession rights if you are not the true original owner of the property is you must have exclusive use. So the dissessor holds the land to the exclusion of the true owner. So adverse possession cannot be successfully claimed if at any time during the statutory period the true owner uses the property for any sense of the word. So basically, this is where it comes to play that when you do some sort of over-the-table deal without using an attorney, when you purchase a property or something, they always make sure that the possession of the property changes at a very specific point in time, either when the closing happens or if the new owner, when he or she buys the property, wants to move into property maybe ahead of time. That is set down in a contract, the specific date when the original owner moves out and the new owner moves in. And there's usually some sort of clause stating that if you're moving in 2 weeks early, but then you don't close, then you're obligated to pay rent for a certain amount of time. I've had to go through that several times, basically. And that came to use when for example, when I bought a property and it was already empty and we're just waiting for the closing to happen and the banks to do their work, and we needed a place to live, so we basically negotiated with the original owner, can we just move in right now because, we're going to close for sure. And then the original owner can say yes or no. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. That's basically what we're talking about, exclusive use here, that people are very particular about exclusive use. And that is one of the requirements if you want to claim adverse possession rights here in the United States of a property. Another requirement, payment of taxes. That would be another reason or another requirement that you'd have to meet as the party that wants to claim adverse possession rights on the property. Payment of taxes, of course, by the true owner and the decessor, so it depends on who pays it, and good faith or bad faith, whether that applies in your case, and dispossession of land owned by a government entity, unless that government acts as a business, of course, is not allowed, as I mentioned in the beginning of the show. So basically, if you're looking to be a party to adverse possession and basically be the decessor and take ownership of a piece of land or improved property that you're not the true original owner of, just by the fact that you've been using it for a long time, you can do that. But you cannot do that if the true original owner is the government, unless the government acts as a business. So I hope that made sense to you. So you can't take the government's property, basically. So here is a little bit of information on adverse possession rights. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Real Estate Real Talk. We're talking about adverse possession rights here in the United States, a little bit of the history and what they are. And you are listening, of course, to Julia M. Spencer on Real Estate Real Talk. I'm really glad that you're here. And we're going to play a little bit of a break song, and then we're going to talk about some of the consequences of adverse possession rights and how they apply for the last segment. And I will be right back after that. So stay on, don't go anywhere. And thank you for staying with me here for Real Estate Real Talk with Julia M. Spencer. You are listening to WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And on today's show, we're talking about adverse possession rights and some of the laws, some of the history, what they even are, how they apply to you as a homeowner or as an investor. And this next little tidbit is going to focus basically on consequences. And we've already mentioned that the party that's looking to gain ownership of a property through adverse possession rights is called a decessor. And some of the consequences basically are that a decessor will be committing a civil trespass on the property is taken, and the owner of the property could cause him to be evicted by an action in trespass, which is an ejectment, or by bringing an action for possession. That can happen as a consequence if you are trying to take a property basically that isn't yours by just taking it. And all common law jurisdictions require that an ejectment action be brought within a specific period of time, after which the true owner is assumed to have acquiesced. So that means he basically no longer is interested in the property. And believe it or not, a lot of times here, why is that even important, or why am I even bringing up this topic? Well, a lot of times here in this state, particularly here even in Chatham County, but also in other areas, when I went to tax sale foreclosure auctions, what I have found is that there are property owners that basically just walk away from a property. It could be that there's a building on it that's in really, really bad shape and they don't want to maintain it or fix it up. Or there might be some code violations that are so significant that the true original owner doesn't want to take care of it. Or maybe they have inherited the property for whatever particular period of time and they just are not interested in taking the inheritance and taking care of it. And believe it or not, that has happened many times. I always want to bring this example that this one time in Macon, Georgia, when I purchased 2 properties from this owner who had 40 and only about 15 of them were rentable, were usable. And he died, unfortunately, and had several children. They had other businesses in town, and they were absolutely not interested at all to take on the dilapidated, blighted properties, and didn't pay the taxes. So they went to the tax sale, and basically the properties were in no man's land. So I could have basically, purchased the properties at a tax sale, obviously, but I could have even just walked in and taken possession and started using them and started paying taxes. And after a while, they would have been mine. So that's basically the story behind that there. But another way to get a good title, of course, as I mentioned, is to purchase properties at tax sale foreclosures. Of course, the title that you get is not completely 100% perfect. You would have to do some legal action to clear it up, and you would have to do that through litigation and a quiet title action. Adverse possession does not work. Adverse possession also does not work against property that's owned by the public, as I mentioned, or by the government. So adverse possession may also apply to territorial rights, believe it or not. So right here in Georgia actually lost an island in the Savannah River to South Carolina in 1990. So when South Carolina had actually used to fill in some land from dredging to attach the island to its own shore. So since Georgia knew of this, yet did nothing about it, the U.S. Supreme Court, which has original jurisdiction over this matter, granted this land to South Carolina, although the Treaty of Beaufort of 1787 explicitly specified that the Rivers Island all Rivers Islands actually belong to Georgia. And if you want to look that up, there's actually a court case. It's the Denville and Horseshoe Shoal court case, and that's from 1990, where basically South Carolina kind of stole a little bit of land from us here in Georgia. So check that out. That was actually really interesting because it's right next door to us here. And again, basically wanted to just give you a little bit of a summary why this is important for a tax sale investor or a real estate investor in general. And we'll do that. I can just tell you that right now. I guess why is it important? So in the U.S., actually, most jurisdictions, few squatters, I guess I call them squatters. You can also more formally say a person that is seeking possession of property through adverse possession rights, but few squatters can meet the legal requirement for adverse possession. Adverse possession exists so that potential or actual defects in real estate titles are remedied by putting a statute of limitations on possible litigation over ownership and possession. So basically, if you get property and some long lost heirs or show up eventually and kind of say, so and so used to have 3 generations back had this property, so I know you have it now, but I was never notified and I'm the heir and it's mine. So before we start taking that to the court, we have statute of limitations basically and adverse possession rights to kind of remedy that. And in Georgia, if you want to research this a little bit more, the laws that I've researched for the making of this show are Georgia statutes 44-4-7, 44-5-14, and 44-5-161 through 164. And what it basically says that in Georgia, it is about will grant adverse possession rights at about 7 years under a color of title. And so appearance of a legally enforceable right of possession can be made around 7 years. But in general, the laws state that it's 20 years. Again, please do check this with your attorney or your legal representative. I am not an attorney. I'm not a legal representative. And I'm just making this show because I am a local real estate investor here. And this is what I do. And I research little tidbits, topics like this, and see how they could be possibly used in my favor in my investing career, but also how I can help you. But I do want to tell you that the viewpoints expressed in the preceding program were not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. So please verify all the information you hear from me or any other source that you receive in media or on the internet or YouTube or anywhere else, make sure you know who you're speaking to and who you're getting this information from. And that, my dear listeners, brings me to the end of my show here, Real Estate Real Talk. My show is on Wednesdays at noon, so please tune in again. And if you have not had a chance to listen to the entirety of this show, you can listen to it again. If you go to the wruu.org website, you can go to archives to Wednesdays to the noon hour, and you'll see me right after the happiness message. You can also go to my YouTube channel. It's really easy to find. My name, Julia M. Spencer. Subscribe there if you want. And there's all kinds of information there. Also, all these radio shows will be put there as well as other videos. And before I get off the air here, I'm going to play you one more song by Herbert Grönemeyer. Was soll das? Is another German song, kind of like on a German track here. And after this show, you will be able to hear some amazing African music hosted by Ben. And I will be back next Wednesday. Have a great Wednesday, everybody.
For your free guide to real estate investing, visit juliamspencer.com.